My sister smashed my son's $500 gaming console into 1,000 pieces on the patio. She laughed. My mother laughed. My brother-in-law laughed. They thought it was just another day of humiliating Tiana. They did not know that my father was watching from the corner. They did not know he was about to do the unthinkable. He stood up. He looked at my mother. And he slowly slid his gold wedding band off his finger and placed it on the table. Then he said 4 words. I kept the receipts. Those 4 words ended a 40-year marriage and exposed a $1 million fraud. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my family's stolen fortune, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who was actually the only one holding the family together. It was supposed to be a celebration. The late afternoon sun beat down on the manicured lawn of my parents' estate in suburban Atlanta. My son Jordan sat cross-legged on the expensive paved patio. He was holding his birthday gift, a brand new handheld gaming console. It had taken me 3 months of saving from what my family thought was my meager salary to buy it. My name is Tiana, and I am 34 years old. To my family, I am just a struggling single mother working a low-level clerical job. They do not know I am actually a senior forensic accountant investigating corporate fraud for Fortune 500 companies. Jordan is 7 and he is on the autism spectrum. He does not ask for much. This device was his world. He was humming happily. Then a shadow fell over him. It was my sister, Bianca. She was holding a glass of sangria and wearing a dress that cost more than my car. Let me see that, she said. She snatched it from his hands before he could react. Jordan made a small, distressed noise. Bianca held it up to the light, examining it with a sneer. Cheap plastic, she muttered. Then she opened her hand. I watched in slow motion as the device fell. It hit the stone pavers with a sickening crunch. The screen shattered, plastic flew everywhere. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. Jordan screamed. He scrambled backward, covering his ears, rocking back and forth. His safe space was destroyed. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Bianca did not even look down. She just laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. Oops, she said, taking a sip of her drink. My hands are so slippery from the condensation. Oh well. He is autistic anyway, Tiana. Video games just rot the brain. I am doing him a favor. I am helping him engage with the real world. I rushed to Jordan, pulling him into my arms, trying to muffle his cries against my chest. My blood was boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm for his sake. As I held my sobbing son, I watched a pair of polished Italian loafers step into my line of sight. It was Chad, my sister's husband. He looked down at the scattered remains of the gaming system with a look of pure annoyance. Not because a child was crying, but because the debris was cluttering his path. He lifted one foot and casually kicked a jagged piece of plastic toward me. It skittered across the patio stones and hit the toe of my sneaker. He dusted off his shoe, as if the mere proximity to my son's joy had soiled him. Just buy another one, Tiana, he said, his voice dripping with that casual arrogance that always made my skin crawl. It is just a toy. Stop making such a scene over plastic. He took a sip of his beer and leaned against the patio railing, looking down at me. I hear you are doing so well with your little filing job these days. Isn't that what you told Mom? That you got a raise at the clerical office? So $500 should be pocket change for a big shot like you. Unless, of course, you spent it all on more of that useless therapy for the kid. I looked up at him and I saw exactly what he was. Chad was a 38-year-old man who had not closed a real estate deal in 2 years. He was a white man who married into a successful black family and somehow convinced himself he was the prize. He lived in my parents' guest house rent-free. He drove a leased BMW that my mother made the payments on. And he hated me. He hated me because I was everything he failed to be. I was independent. I was self-made. I owned my own home and paid my own bills, while he had to ask his wife for an allowance. But he did not know that. To him, and everyone else here, I was just Tiana, the single mom, with the boring desk job, who probably needed government assistance to survive. He had no idea that the filing job he mocked was actually a senior position in forensic accounting, where I spent my days hunting down men exactly like him who tried to hide assets and defraud investors. Chad laughed when I didn't answer immediately. What is the matter, cat got your tongue? Or maybe you are just realizing how stupid it is to spend money on specialized toys for a kid who cannot even look people in the eye. You are wasting your cash, Tiana. Therapies, special schools, gadgets. None of it is going to fix him. You should save your money. Maybe buy some better clothes so you do not show up to family events looking like the help. He gestured vaguely at my simple linen dress. It was a designer piece, but understated. Unlike the flashy logos he and Bianca plastered themselves in to prove their worth. His words were designed to hurt, but they only sharpened my focus. He was talking about money and worth. Two things he knew nothing about. I gently rubbed Jordan's back, feeling his small body trembling against mine. I committed Chad's words to memory. Every single insult, every sneer. He was so confident standing there in his borrowed shoes, drinking my father's wine. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was weak. He was about to find out that the woman he called a clerk knew more about his financial secrets than he did himself. The sliding glass door to the main house glided open with a soft hush that somehow silenced the entire patio. My mother Claudette stepped out into the afternoon heat. She was holding a crystal goblet filled with deep red wine, her fingers adorned with rings that caught the sunlight. She paused at the edge of the stone steps, looking down at the scene before her like a queen surveying a peasant revolt. She took in the scattered shards of the gaming console. She looked at Chad smirking with his foot on the debris. She looked at Bianca checking her makeup. And finally, she looked at me kneeling on the hard ground, clutching my sobbing son. I waited for it. The moment she would ask what happened. The moment she would act like a grandmother and comfort the terrified child. Or perhaps the moment she would chastise her 37-year-old daughter for destroying a gift. I should have known better. I should have learned my lesson 10 years ago, but hope is a dangerous thing. Claudette sighed, a long, exasperated sound that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes narrowing as she focused solely on me. Here we go again, she said. Her voice deceptively calm, but carrying that sharp edge that could slice through my confidence like a knife. You are making a scene again, Tiana. Always making a scene. Why must everything be a production with you? Mom, I started to say, but she held up a hand to silence me. The gold bracelets on her wrist jingled. I do not want to hear it. Today is supposed to be a celebration, a happy occasion. But here you are dragging that dark cloud of yours over everything. Look at you. You are bringing that sour single mother face into my home and bringing bad luck on the whole family. It is a birthday party, Tiana. Try to act like you have some joy in your life for once. I felt a tremor start in my hands and spread rapidly through my body. It was not fear. It was a physical reaction to the sheer weight of the injustice. My sister had just destroyed my son's property out of malice. Her husband had mocked my financial status. My child was hyperventilating in my arms, and I was the one being scolded for ruining the mood. The favoritism was so blatant, so naked, that it almost took my breath away. Claudette stepped closer, her heels clicking on the patio stones. She gestured vaguely at Jordan, who was still rocking back and forth. And get him to stop that noise. The neighbors will think we are hurting him. Honestly, Tiana, if you had listened to me and raised him with a firmer hand, he would not be so sensitive. You coddle him just like you wallow in your own misfortune. It is exhausting for the rest of us. We are trying to have a nice afternoon, and you are determined to make it about your struggles. She took another sip of wine, her eyes cold and hard as flint. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. She called herself a pillar of the community. She sat in the front pew at church every Sunday, wearing her expensive hats and singing about grace and charity. But here in her own backyard, she was a monster. She looked at the broken plastic on the ground and then looked back at me with a look of pure disdain. "Clean that up," she said, "before the guests arrive. We cannot have trash cluttering the patio. It looks low class. And fix your face, Tiana. Nobody wants to look at a martyr while they are eating cake." I stared at her, trembling so hard I could barely hold Jordan. The vibration of my anger seemed to pass into him, and he buried his face deeper into my neck. She did not care about the broken toy. She did not care about her grandson's pain. She only cared about the appearance of perfection. And in her eyes, I was the only flaw in the picture. I gently placed the noise-canceling headphones back over Jordan's ears and kissed his forehead. He was still trembling, but he had closed his eyes, retreating into the safety of his internal world. I needed him to be blocked out for this next part, because I was done being the silent victim. I stood up slowly, brushing the dust and grit from my knees. I smoothed down my linen dress and turned to face my sister. Bianca was scrolling through her phone, probably deleting comments from creditors on her social media feed. She did not even acknowledge my presence until I stepped directly into her personal space. "Apologize," I said. The word hung in the humid air like a challenge. Bianca lowered her phone and looked at me with a mixture of amusement and contempt. She blinked her heavy false lashes as if she could not believe what she was hearing. "Excuse me," she said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Did you just give me an order?" I took a step closer. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, but my voice remained steady. I said, "Apologize to my son. You destroyed his property. You terrified him. He is 7 years old, Bianca, and he has done nothing to you. You are going to look at him, and you are going to tell him you are sorry." The patio went silent. Even Chad stopped snickering. They were not used to this Tiana. They were used to the Tiana who kept her head down and swallowed every insult to keep the peace. But that Tiana died the moment that gaming console hit the ground. Bianca stared at me for a long moment, and then her face twisted into a sneer. She tossed her long weave over her shoulder and crossed her arms. "You have got to be kidding me. You want me to apologize to him. I am the eldest daughter in this family, Tiana. I am your big sister. I do not bow down to you, and I certainly do not apologize to a child who cannot even look me in the eye." She took a sip of her sangria, her eyes cold and hard. "Besides, you should be thanking me. I just did you a favor. You coddle that boy way too much. Always buying him special toys, always making sure the environment is perfect for him. It is pathetic. The real world is not going to care about his sensory issues or his feelings. The world is hard, Tiana. It is cruel and it is disappointing. I just taught him a valuable lesson about loss. He needs to learn that things break and that crying about it will not fix anything. He needs to toughen up, or he is going to end up just like you, weak and dependent on handouts." My mother hummed in agreement from the sidelines. "She is right," Tiana Claudette chimed in. "You are raising him to be soft. Bianca is just trying to help prepare him for reality. You are too sensitive and you are making him sensitive too. It is embarrassing." I looked from my mother to my sister. The gaslighting was breathtaking. Here stood a woman who had never worked a hard day in her life, who was drowning in debt and living off her parents, claiming she was teaching my son about the harshness of reality. She broke a $500 device just to be cruel, and now she was wrapping her malice in the guise of education. She was not teaching him a lesson. She was punishing him for being mine. And she was punishing me for having the audacity to buy him something nice. "You call bullying a lesson?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think destroying a child's joy is teaching him about the world. You are not a teacher, Bianca. You are just a bully. And you are jealous that I can afford to buy him things you cannot even afford for yourself. That console cost $500. I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "Do you know how long it took me to save that amount? I put aside $50 a week from my paycheck for 3 months. I skipped lunches. I walked to work instead of taking the train. I made sacrifices so my son could have one nice thing that was just for him. And you destroyed it in 3 seconds because you felt like being cruel. It was not just plastic and glass, Bianca. It was my time. It was my labor. It was my love for my son, manifested in the only way I could afford right now. And you treated it like trash because you treat us like trash. I expected shame. I expected my mother to finally step in and tell Bianca she had gone too far. Instead, Claudette threw her head back and laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound that held no warmth, only derision. She swirled the wine in her glass, looking at me with eyes that were full of pity. But the kind of pity you feel for a bug before you crush it. Oh, Tiana. She sighed, shaking her head as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a spilled cup of milk. Please listen to yourself. You are embarrassing the family with this poverty mindset. 3 months. You spent 3 months saving up $500. She turned to Bianca, and they shared a look of amused superiority. Honey, Bianca makes $500 in the time it takes her to snap a picture of her latte and post it on Instagram. She is an influencer, Tiana. She has a brand. She has followers. She generates wealth with a snap of her fingers while you are scratching coins together from whatever little filing job you are working at now. Claudette took a step toward me, her face hardening. Do not stand there and try to guilt-trip your sister with your financial struggles. It is unbecoming. And do not dare try to compare yourself to her. Bianca has status. She has a reputation to maintain. She operates on a level you cannot even comprehend in your little world of budgets and coupons. If you are angry, it is because you are jealous. You are jealous that she has a husband. You are jealous that she is beautiful. And you are jealous that $500 is a rounding error to her while it is a life savings to you. So stop counting pennies in my backyard. It makes you look desperate and low class. And we do not do low class in this house. I looked at my mother, and I felt a strange sense of detachment settle over me. She really believed it. She believed the lie Bianca had spun about her glamorous life. She believed the leased cars and the maxed-out credit cards were signs of wealth. And she believed that my modesty was a sign of failure. She had no idea that the woman she called low class was a senior forensic accountant who had just closed a case recovering $12 million in stolen assets for a tech giant. She did not know that I could buy this entire house with the bonus check sitting in my savings account right now. But she was right about one thing. I was counting. But I was not counting pennies. I was counting the seconds until I destroyed their delusions. I looked past the wall of hostility that was my mother and sister to the far corner of the patio where my father Otis sat in his wicker chair. He was the variable in this equation that I had never quite been able to solve. For my entire life, he had been a ghost in his own home, a silent observer who drifted through the rooms like smoke. He rarely raised his voice, but he rarely raised a hand to help either. Today, however, I saw something different in his posture. His knuckles were white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. His jaw was working as if he was chewing on words he was afraid to spit out. He was looking at the scattered shards of the gaming console and then at Jordan curling into himself on the sofa. For a fleeting second, I saw a spark of the man who used to sneak me extra dessert when Mom was not looking, the man who used to call me his little accountant, before Mom told him to stop encouraging my boring hobbies. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made eye contact with him. I pleaded with him silently, begging him with everything I had left. Dad, please, do not let them do this. Do not let them stand there and mock your grandson while he cries. Just this once be the father I need. Be the grandfather Jordan deserves. Stand up. Say something. Anything. I saw the conflict warring behind his eyes. I saw the shame and the anger battling with decades of conditioning. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding, and he began to push himself up from the chair. His knees straightened. He was standing. He was actually standing up to intervene. A surge of hope rushed through me so powerful it almost made me dizzy. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was not lost. Then Claudette turned her head. She did not shout. She did not make a scene. She simply looked at him. It was a look of such concentrated venom and dominance that it chilled the air between them. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and she arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. It was a silent command, a reminder of who held the purse strings, who held the social status, and who held his leash. "Sit down, Otis," her eyes seemed to say. "Do not embarrass me. Do not make me destroy you too." The air crackled with the silent standoff. I watched my father waiting for him to break the chain, waiting for him to choose me. But the spark in his eyes died as quickly as it had appeared. His shoulders slumped as if the invisible weight of her disapproval was physically crushing him. He looked at me one last time, and in that glance I saw his answer. It was an apology, but it was a cowardly one. He looked away. He lowered himself back into the wicker chair, the straw groaning under his weight. He picked up his book with trembling hands and stared fixedly at a page he was not reading. He chose her. He chose his comfort. He chose his silence over my dignity and my son's safety. The betrayal hit me harder than Bianca's cruelty or Chad's mockery. They were enemies and I expected them to attack, but he was supposed to be my protector. Seeing him retreat back into his shell was the final straw. The last thread of hope that I had for this family snapped. I realized then that his silence was not neutrality. His silence was complicity. He was not a victim of her tyranny, he was her enforcer through inaction. And that hurt more than anything else ever could. I turned my back on my father, effectively turning my back on the last shred of hope I had held for this family. He had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. I walked over to the outdoor sofa where Jordan was curled into a tight ball, his hands clamped over the noise-canceling headphones. He was rocking rhythmically, a self-soothing motion that broke my heart because I knew exactly how unsafe he felt. I did not say a word to my mother or Chad. They did not deserve my breath. I bent down and scooped Jordan into my arms. He was 7 years old and heavy dead weight in his distress, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins made him feel as light as a feather. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, his tears wetting my collar, and I held him tighter silently, promising him that we were getting out of this toxic pit. I marched toward the sliding glass doors, intending to grab my purse from the kitchen counter and drive until this house was just a bad memory in my rearview mirror. I was 3 steps away from the threshold when a blur of bright fabric cut across my path. It was Bianca. She moved with surprising speed for someone who had claimed to be exhausted from her glamorous life just moments ago. She planted herself directly in front of the glass doors, blocking my entry into the house. Her arms crossed over her chest in a stance of absolute defiance. "Where do you think you are going?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Move, Bianca," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I need my keys. You are not going anywhere," she hissed, her eyes darting toward the driveway, where the first cars of the party guests were likely pulling up. "The bishop is coming, Tiana. The deacon board is coming. We have 50 people arriving in less than 20 minutes to celebrate my nephew and take photos for my feed. You are not going to ruin my engagement numbers by storming out like a petulant child." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the level of narcissism required to say those words. "You just destroyed his birthday present?" I said slowly, struggling to keep my voice from rising. "You made him cry. You allowed your husband to mock us. And now you want us to stay and pose for pictures. It is called family obligation, Tiana," she snapped, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Something you would know about if you were not so selfish. Look at this setup. Look at the decorations Mom paid for. If you leave now, everyone will ask where the birthday boy is. They will ask why his mother is not here. And what am I supposed to tell them? That you threw a tantrum over a toy, that you are too unstable to handle a simple family gathering. No, you are not going to humiliate me like that. You are going to go into that bathroom, fix your face, wipe his nose, and bring him back out here to smile when they sing happy birthday." She took a step closer, invading my personal space, the smell of her expensive perfume clashing with the scent of wine on her breath. "You owe me this, Tiana. Mom and Dad have supported your mediocrity for years. The least you can do is help us maintain the image of a functional family for one afternoon. Do not make me look like the sister of a charity case who could not even handle a party. You stay, or I swear I will make sure everyone in our social circle knows exactly how ungrateful you really are. The absurdity of her threat washed over me. She was holding me hostage not with a weapon, but with the threat of social embarrassment. She truly believed that her image, her likes, and her reputation in the church were more important than my son's well-being. She stood between me and my freedom, a gatekeeper of misery, demanding I perform for the very people who were destroying me. But as I looked at her blocking my way, I realized she had miscalculated. She thought I was trapped. She did not realize that a trapped animal is the most dangerous thing in the world. I pushed past Bianca, my shoulder colliding with hers hard enough to make her stagger back a step in her stilettos. She gasped, clutching her chest, as if I had assaulted her, but I did not stop. I carried Jordan into the living room, the air conditioning hitting my flesh skin like a physical shock. The room was pristine white furniture, glass tables, expensive art on the walls. It was a showroom, not a home. I gently set Jordan down on the white leather sofa, ignoring the rule about no shoes on the furniture. He was still wearing his headphones, his eyes squeezed shut against the sensory overload. I stroked his hair once, whispering that it would be over soon. Then I straightened up and turned to face the door, just as my family spilled into the room behind me. Bianca was the first one in her face, twisted in indignation. "You pushed me!" she screeched, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Did you see that, Mom? She physically assaulted me. Tiana, you have lost your mind." Claudette followed her, shaking her head. "This is exactly what I was talking about. Violence, aggression. You are out of control, Tiana. You need to leave before you hurt someone else." I did not flinch. I did not apologize. I stood my ground in the center of their perfect living room, and I let my anger crystallize into something cold and hard. "I am not leaving," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through their noise. "Not yet. Not until this is settled." "Settled?" Bianca laughed, a harsh barking sound. "What is there to settle? You broke the mood, you pushed me, and now you are trespassing. Get out of my parents' house before we call the police." "Call them," I challenged. "Call the police and tell them you destroyed private property and are now holding me against my will. See how that looks on your Instagram story. But before you do that, we are going to handle the matter of my son's property." I took a step toward her. "You broke a $500 device, Bianca. You did it deliberately and maliciously. You traumatized a disabled child for your own amusement. I demanded an apology, and you refused. So now we are moving to restitution." I held out my hand, palm up. $500. Cash. Right now. The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then Chad let out a guffaw that echoed off the high ceilings. He slapped his knee, looking around at the others as if I had just told the world's funniest joke. "Oh, this is rich," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. "This is priceless. Did you hear that, babe? She wants $500. He walked over to me, shaking his head, his expression shifting from amusement to sneering contempt. "Tiana, are you serious? You are really going to try to extort your own sister? Is money that tight in the filing room? Did you spend your last paycheck on those ugly shoes, and now you need grocery money?" He leaned in close, his breath smelling of beer. "You are pathetic, trying to shake us down because you cannot manage your own finances. It is $500, Tiana. It is nothing. But I guess to someone like you, it is a fortune. You want money? Go ask the government. Or maybe find another baby daddy to sponge off of. Do not come here begging for handouts just because you are jealous of what we have." I looked at him, and for the first time I saw the fear behind his arrogance. He was loud because he was empty. He was cruel because he was insecure. And he was mocking me about money because he knew deep down that without my parents' support, he would be nothing. $500 might be nothing to the image he projected, but I knew for a fact it was everything to his bank account. I held my hand steady, my eyes locking with his. "I am not begging, Chad. I am collecting a debt, and unlike you, I pay my bills. Now pay up." My mother sighed, the sound heavy with performative exhaustion. She stepped between Chad and me, her heels sinking into the plush white carpet she was so afraid I would soil. She did not look at my face. She looked at her designer handbag hanging from her arm. With slow, deliberate movements, she unzipped the main compartment and began to dig through it. The room went quiet again, everyone watching her with bated breath. Was she going to write a check? Was she going to pull out cash to cover the damage? For a fleeting second, I thought maybe she was finally going to do the right thing. I should have known better. She pulled out a single crisp $20 bill. She did not hand it to me. She did not place it on the table. She flicked her wrist and tossed the money into the air. It fluttered down, erratic and slow, landing on the floor right next to my mud-stained sneaker. The green paper looked small and pathetic against the white expanse of the rug. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Take that and go buy him some candy or a ball or whatever simple thing he can actually appreciate without breaking. Just stop this nonsense immediately. You are embarrassing the family over pocket change, Tiana. It is humiliating." I stared at the $20. It was an insult. It was a slap in the face. It was 4% of the value of the property her daughter had just destroyed. But to Claudette, it was a generous offering to a beggar. She crossed her arms and glared at me. "Do not look at me like that," she snapped. "I have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars raising you, Tiana. I paid for the braces on your teeth. I paid for the clothes on your back for 18 years. I paid for the food you ate and the roof over your head. I invested a fortune in you, and look at the return I got. A daughter who stands in my living room demanding money like a common debt collector." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "You want to talk about debts? You owe me, Tiana. You owe me for your life. You owe me for every sacrifice I made to keep you fed and clothed. And now, because your sister had a little accident with a toy, you have the audacity to demand $500. Where is your gratitude? Where is your sense of family obligation?" She gestured violently at the money on the floor. "Pick it up," she commanded. "Pick it up and leave before the guests arrive. I will not have you ruining Bianca's reputation or mine because you are greedy. Take the $20. It is more than you deserve for causing this scene." The room seemed to shrink. The air grew thin. I looked from the money on the floor to my mother's face. She really believed she was the victim here. She believed that feeding her child was a transaction that obligated me to accept abuse in perpetuity. She thought she could buy my silence and my dignity for $20. She thought I was still the little girl who was afraid of her voice. She was wrong. I stared at the crumpled $20 bill lying on the white carpet. It looked like trash. It looked like an insult. My mother was waiting for me to bend down. She was waiting for me to scrape for her scraps like I had done my entire childhood. She wanted to see me on my knees, but my knees did not bend. I stepped over the money carefully, as if it were something foul that might stain my shoes. I closed the distance between us until I could smell the expensive Chardonnay on her breath. I looked directly into her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I did not blink. I did not look away. "You want to talk about debts, Mom?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You want to talk about what I owe you for the burden of raising your own child? Let us talk about it. But let us talk about the ledger you seem to have forgotten." Claudette scoffed, trying to maintain her superior air, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. "I do not know what you are babbling about, Tiana. Just take the money and go." "I am not talking about $20, I said. I am talking about $2,000. Every single month. For 10 years. Since the day I got my first promotion, I have sent you a check on the first of the month. You told me Dad needed it for his heart medication. You told me the roof was leaking. You told me the property taxes were going up. You cried on the phone about how hard it was to maintain this big house on a fixed income. And I paid. I paid without question because I thought that is what a good daughter does." The room went deathly silent. Bianca stopped checking her reflection in the mirror. Chad actually took his feet off the coffee table. Even Jordan seemed to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure and peeked out from under his headphones. I did the math for you, Mom, since you seem to have trouble with numbers today. $2,000 a month for 120 months. That is $240,000. That is $250,000 that I have poured into this house, into your hands. I gestured around the pristine living room. I looked for the repairs you mentioned. The roof still has the same water stain in the corner from 5 years ago. Dad is still wearing the same suits from the 90s. So tell me something. If I am such a burden, and if I owe you so much, where did my $240,000 go? Because it certainly is not on the floor next to that $20 bill. Claudette's face turned a shade of pale gray that clashed with her heavy makeup. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For once, the queen of the household had absolutely nothing to say. She took a step back, clutching her pearls, as if I had physically struck her. She looked frantically at Bianca and then at the floor, anywhere but at me. But I was not done. I was just getting started. Claudette blinked rapidly, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for a script she had misplaced. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. I saw the panic of a woman caught in a lie so big she had forgotten where the truth ended and the fabrication began. Her hand went to her throat, fingering the gold cross necklace she wore like a shield of righteousness. But the moment of vulnerability was fleeting. It vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a look of steely indignation that I knew all too well. She straightened her spine, pulling herself up to her full height and looking down her nose at me with renewed ferocity. "How dare you!" she hissed, her voice low and trembling with manufactured outrage. "How dare you stand in my house and question me about money, you ungrateful child? I used that money to keep a roof over your head. I used it to fix the plumbing that was rotting in the walls. I used it to keep the lights on so your father could read his Bible in peace. And yes, I gave to the church. I gave to the building fund. I gave to the mission trips. I sowed seeds of faith, Tiana, something you would know nothing about with your cold heart." She took a step closer, invading my space, her perfume cloying and heavy. "You think you can come in here and demand an accounting? Who do you think you are? Are you auditing me now? Is that what you do with your little clerical job? You count pennies and judge your own mother. You have no idea what it costs to maintain a legacy. You have no idea the sacrifices I make every day to keep this family respectable in the eyes of the community." She waved her hand dismissively at the room. "You see this furniture? You see these clean floors? That costs money, Tiana. Money that I manage. Money that I stretch to make miracles happen. And instead of thanking me, instead of falling on your knees in gratitude that you have a home to come back to, you stand there and accuse me of theft. You are sick. You are twisted by greed and jealousy." I watched her performance with a cold detachment that surprised me. In the past, her words would have made me crumble. I would have apologized. I would have begged for forgiveness for questioning her. But today, all I saw was a desperate woman trying to cover her tracks with noise and religious guilt. She was not a saint. She was a con artist in a Sunday hat. And the mention of auditing made me almost smile. She had no idea how close to the truth she was. She thought she was insulting me, but she was actually describing exactly what was about to happen. She was right about one thing, though. I was auditing her. And I had found a massive discrepancy in the books. Bianca stepped forward, placing a protective hand on our mother's shoulder. She glared at me, her perfectly made-up face twisted in annoyance. "Stop lying, Tiana," she spat. "You are making up numbers to sound important. $2,000 a month. Please, we all know you barely make enough to cover your own rent, let alone support Mom and Dad. And even if you did send money, so what? $2,000 might be a fortune to you in your little world, but to me it is just the price of a handbag. It is pocket change. It is what I spend on a weekend getaway. You act like you are bankrolling the family empire with your lunch money. It is pathetic." She tossed her hair back, the gesture practiced and dismissive. "You are just jealous that Mom appreciates my success more than your charity. I bring value to this family. I bring status. You bring drama and cheap gifts. So take your little accusations and get out. Nobody believes you anyway. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. I saw the way her hand trembled slightly as she clutched her designer purse. I saw the faint line of sweat on her upper lip despite the air conditioning. She was projecting confidence, but she was radiating fear. And then my eyes landed on the bag she was so proud of. It was a Birkin. Or at least it was trying very hard to be one. But I knew better. I knew because I had spent the last 6 months investigating a luxury goods smuggling ring for a client. I knew the stitching on a real Hermes bag was hand-sewn and angled. Hers was machine straight. I knew the hardware should be plated in gold or palladium. Hers had the dull shine of polished brass. And I knew the leather should smell like money, not chemicals. A laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. It was a dry, humorless sound, but it made Bianca flinch. "You are right, Bianca," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. $2,000 is the price of a handbag, a real one anyway. But that thing on your arm, that is not a handbag, that is a crime scene. Bianca clutched the bag tighter, her knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about? This is an authentic Birkin. Chad bought it for me in Paris." "Paris?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call the flea market on Beaufort Highway? Because I saw that exact bag at a stall there yesterday when I was picking up spices. Same crooked stitching, same cheap hardware. It is a knockoff Bianca. And not even a good one. It is a super fake, grade A replica. Probably cost about $200. So if Chad told you he spent thousands, he is lying to you. Or maybe you are lying to us. Which is it?" The color drained from Bianca's face. She looked down at the bag as if it had suddenly turned into a snake. Chad shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the room, looking anywhere but at his wife. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I had just called her bluff in the most humiliating way possible. I had stripped away the veneer of her success and revealed the cheap plastic underneath. And for the first time since I walked into this house, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Because she realized that I saw everything. Bianca turned the color of ash. She snatched the bag from her arm and shoved it behind her back, as if hiding the evidence would erase the truth I had just spoken. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. She looked at Chad, her expression a mix of fury and pleading. She needed him to be the man he pretended to be. She needed him to silence me. Chad stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the carpet. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He got right in my face, his breath hot and sour. "Watch your mouth, Tiana," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are just a bitter, jealous little woman trying to tear us down because you have nothing. You talk about my wife again, and I will make you regret it. You think you are so smart with your little Google searches, but you are out of your league." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked up at him and I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that I usually reserved for defendants in a courtroom right before I presented the smoking gun. "You want to talk about leagues, Chad?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Let us talk about yours. You stand here in my parents' house drinking their wine, wearing a watch that probably ticks too loud, and you brag about your success. You told everyone earlier about the $1 million deal you were about to close. That big commercial real estate development downtown. Is that right?" Chad blinked, surprised by the shift. "That is right," he said, puffing up again. "It is a game changer. Something a clerk like you would not understand. It is high-level finance." "High level," I repeated. "That is funny. Because I was looking at the county clerk's database this morning. It is part of my routine when I'm tracking assets for an investigation. And I saw a very interesting filing come through at 9 a.m. It was a notice of default. But it was not for a client you represent, Chad. It was for you." Chad froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a terrified man who knew he had been caught. I took a step toward him, forcing him to retreat. I saw your name on the bad debt list, Chad. I said clearly so everyone could hear. Specifically for that condo you claimed you owned free and clear. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings because you have not made a mortgage payment in 6 months. And that $1 million deal. I made a call to the development firm you mentioned. They have never heard of you. You are not the broker, Chad. You are not even an employee. You were fired 4 months ago for mishandling escrow funds. So, tell me again about this deal you are closing. Or are you just closing the door on your last chance before they come to repossess your car, too? The air in the room grew so heavy it felt difficult to breathe. Chad stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, but no sound came out. The arrogance that had coated him like a second skin just moments ago had evaporated, leaving behind a small, terrified man who realized he was standing on a trapdoor. He took a stumbling step back, his eyes darting to the door as if calculating his odds of escape. My mother looked from him to me, her face a mask of confusion and denial. She shook her head slowly, the movement stiff and jerky. "How do you know that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are just a clerk, Tiana. You work in a cubicle filing invoices. How could you possibly know about Chad's business affairs? You are making this up. You are lying to hurt him because you are jealous." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that made everyone flinch. I turned my gaze to her, and for the first time she recoiled. "I am not a clerk, Mom," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I never was. You assumed that because it fit your narrative of me as the failure. You heard the word accountant and you imagined me with a calculator tapping away at tax returns for minimum wage. You never asked for details. You never asked about my title. You never asked about my cases. So let me correct the record right now." I took a step into the center of the room, commanding the space like it was my own courtroom. "I am a senior forensic accountant, Mom. I do not file taxes. I hunt thieves. I work with multinational corporations and federal agencies to track down embezzlement, money laundering, and corporate fraud. I spend my days analyzing complex financial webs to find the one loose thread that unravels the entire lie. And Chad here is not even a complex case. He is sloppy. He leaves digital footprints everywhere. I found his foreclosure notice in 3 minutes. I found the record of his termination in 5. To me, he is just another petty grifter trying to play in the big leagues without the skills or the capital to back it up." Chad made a strangled noise in his throat, but he could not form words. He looked at Bianca, pleading for help, but she was staring at him with dawning horror. She was realizing that the lifestyle she had been flaunting, the status she had been using to bludgeon me, was built on smoke and mirrors. And worse, she was realizing that the sister she had mocked for being poor was the one holding the flashlight, exposing their ruin. "You thought I was weak because I was quiet," I said, looking directly at Chad. "You thought I was stupid because I did not brag about my money. But in my line of work, silence is a weapon. We watch. We wait. We gather evidence. And when we have enough, we strike. I have been watching you for months, Chad. I have seen the credit card applications in my parents' names that you tried to hide. I have seen the transfers from their retirement accounts that you claimed were investment opportunities. I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly what you have done. So do not think for 1 second that you can intimidate me. You are not a wolf. You are just a sheep who got lost in a forest full of predators. And I am the apex predator here." My mother let out a scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. The crystal wine glass she had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the white carpet, sending a spray of red liquid across the pristine fabric like a fresh wound. She did not even look down. Her eyes were fixed on me, bulging with a mixture of terror and unadulterated hatred. She marched across the room, stepping heedlessly on the shards of glass, her chest heaving with exertion. She stopped inches from my face, her hand raised as if she wanted to strike me, but she held back, shaking with the effort of her restraint. "Shut your mouth," she shrieked, her voice cracking with the force of her volume. "Shut your mouth right now! How dare you? How dare you stand in my house and admit to spying on your own family? You investigated your sister. You ran background checks on your brother-in-law. You treated your own flesh and blood like criminals in one of your little cases. That is not a job, Tiana, that is a betrayal. That is sickness. She paced back and forth in front of me, her hands pulling at her hair, messing up the perfect coiffure she had spent hours at the salon achieving. I looked at Chad and I saw a man trying to provide for his family. I looked at Bianca and I saw a woman trying to maintain her dignity. But you. You looked at them and you saw targets. You saw victims for your little game. You are not a forensic accountant, Tiana. You are a predator. You are a snake. A poisonous viper that I warmed in my own bosom only to have you bite me the moment you got strong enough. She turned back to me, her face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness that stripped away every layer of her church lady facade. You think you are so smart with your facts and your figures. You think you are better than us because you have a title and a bank account. But you are nothing. You are rot. You are a cancer in this family that has been eating away at our happiness for 34 years. You talk about money and debts. You talk about what we owe you. Let me tell you about debt, Tiana. You owe me for not leaving you in a basket on a fire station doorstep. The room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Even Bianca gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My mother leaned in close, her eyes cold and dead. I should have done it, she whispered, the words hissing through her teeth. I should have listened to my instincts when the nurse handed you to me. I knew then that there was something wrong with you, something broken and dark. I should have signed the papers and walked away. I regret it, Tiana. I regret not abandoning you when you were a baby. I regret keeping you every single day of my life, because all you have ever been is a burden and a curse on this family. You were a mistake. And looking at you now, standing there destroying your sister's happiness, I realize it is the biggest mistake I ever made. The words hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of my lungs. I felt the sting of tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, hot and burning, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give her that satisfaction. I bit the inside of my lip until I tasted the metallic tang of blood, using the physical pain to ground me against the emotional evisceration I had just endured. My mother had just wished me out of existence. She had rewritten the history of my life to make my very survival a mistake. It was the ultimate rejection, the final severance of the cord that had bound us. I stood there trembling, not with fear, but with the sheer effort of holding myself together while my world fractured. Then I felt a small, frantic weight slam into my leg. It was Jordan. He had abandoned the safety of the sofa and run to me, burying his face in my thigh, his small hands clutching the fabric of my dress so tightly his knuckles were white. He was shaking violently, absorbing the toxicity in the room like a sponge. I reached down and placed my hand on his head, my fingers tangling in his soft curls. He was my anchor. He was the reason I could not break. I looked down at him and took a deep breath, inhaling his scent of baby shampoo and innocence, and I used it to build a wall around my heart. I was not her mistake. I was his mother, and I would burn this house to the ground before I let them hurt him 1 second longer. A sound cut through the heavy silence. It was laughter. Bianca was laughing. She was looking from our mother's twisted face to my tear-filled eyes, and she was laughing with pure, unadulterated glee. It was the sound of a predator who realized the prey was already wounded. She clapped her hands together, her bracelets jangling a triumphant rhythm. "Did you hear that, Tiana?" she crowed, her voice shrill with excitement. "Did you hear what Mom just said? She hates you. She has always hated you. You thought you could come in here with your little facts and your little investigations and turn her against me. You thought you could expose us. But look at you now. You are unwanted. You are unloved. You are nothing but a regret." She stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with malice. "So go ahead. Take your brat and get out. Nobody wants you here. We are done with you. But before you go, hand it over." She held out her hand, palm open, expectantly. I stared at her hand, confused by the sudden pivot. Hand what over? My keys, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The keys to your car. I saw it in the driveway, that black SUV. It is a rental, right? Or maybe a company car. Whatever it is nice. Nicer than what Chad and I are driving right now since his Jag is in the shop. We have a party to go to tonight at the club, a VIP event, and we cannot show up in Mom's old sedan. It would ruin the aesthetic. So give me the keys. You can take an Uber home. Or walk. I do not care. Just leave the car. I looked at her outstretched hand and then up at her face. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. She had just watched our mother verbally annihilate me. She had just laughed at my pain. And in the very next breath, she was demanding my property because she wanted to look rich for strangers. It was a level of entitlement that bordered on insanity. She truly believed that everything I had was hers for the taking simply because she wanted it. She thought I was so broken, so desperate for any scrap of connection that I would hand over the keys to my $70,000 vehicle just to be useful to them one last time. She saw me not as a person, but as a resource to be stripped, mined, and discarded. And that realization turned my sadness into something cold and deadly. I reached into my purse, but instead of handing the keys over, I gripped the cool metal tightly in my fist. I pulled my hand back sharply as Bianca lunged for them, her polished fingernails grazing my wrist. She stumbled slightly, her greed making her clumsy. I took a step back, putting distance between us, holding Jordan closer with my other arm. I looked around the room, seeing it properly for the first time in years. The Italian marble fireplace, the silk drapes that pooled on the floor, the chandelier dripping with crystals that caught the afternoon light. It was a palace built on lies, a monument to their vanity, constructed brick by brick with my money. I saw the ghost of every check I had written, every overtime hour I had worked, every sacrifice I had made believing I was helping my family survive. I did not help them survive. I helped them thrive while I starved. I paid for the roof that sheltered them while they plotted against me. I paid for the cars they drove to parties I wasn't invited to. I paid for the very clothes on their backs while they mocked mine, and in return, they gave me nothing but scorn. They took my generosity and twisted it into entitlement. They took my love and weaponized it against me. And worst of all, they took my son's innocence and smashed it on the patio for sport. You want my car? I asked, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. You want the one thing I have left to get my son away from here? You stand there in a house that my money renovated, wearing clothes my money bought, and you have the audacity to demand more. You look at me and you see an ATM, not a sister. You look at my son and you see a nuisance, not a nephew. You have taken everything from me, Bianca. You took my childhood by being the golden girl. You took my adulthood by bleeding me dry, and today you tried to take my son's happiness. I swept my gaze across the room, catching Chad's averted eyes and my mother's stony glare. You all live in this luxury. You sip your wine and plan your parties and pretend you are royalty. But you are parasites. You are living in a fantasy world funded by the sweat off my brow and the tears I cried when I couldn't afford to heat my own apartment because I sent the money here. You live in silk and velvet while I scraped by. And you have the absolute unmitigated nerve to treat me like a beggar in the house I paid for. I tightened my grip on Jordan, feeling his heart beating against my side. Well, the bank is closed. The charity is over. You have pushed me too far. You broke my son's toy, but you also broke the last chain holding me to this family. You think you are better than me because you are beautiful and loud, but beauty fades and noise stops. What remains is character, and yours is rotten to the core. Today is the last day you will ever take anything from me. Not a dollar, not a ride, not a single moment of my time. Today is the day the bill comes due, and trust me, Bianca, you cannot afford it. The silence that followed my declaration was shattered by a sound that made my stomach turn. It was my mother gasping for air, not in sorrow, but in pure, unadulterated fury. She had lost control of the narrative. She had lost control of the money. And now she was losing control of the room. She spun around her heels, catching in the carpet, and she fixed her gaze on the one person she knew she could still dominate. My father was still sitting in the corner. His head bowed, his hands resting on his knees like a man waiting for a sentencing. He had not moved since the argument began. He had not spoken. He had simply existed in the background, a piece of furniture with a pulse. But now Claudette needed a weapon, and he was the only one she had left. "Otis, are you dead?" she screamed, her voice cracking with the sheer force of her rage. She pointed a shaking finger at me, but her eyes were locked on him. "Are you just going to sit there and let this ungrateful girl talk to me like that? Look at her. She is mocking us. She is stealing the car keys. She is disrespecting the mother who gave her life. Are you a man, or are you a corpse? Get up." My father flinched as if she had thrown boiling water on him. He looked up, his eyes wide and fearful. He looked at her, and then he looked at me. I saw the panic in his face. He was a man who had spent 40 years avoiding conflict by doing exactly what he was told. He was a man who had traded his spine for a quiet life. And now his owner was calling him to heel. "Get up, Otis!" she shrieked again, stomping her foot on the white carpet like a petulant child. "Get up right now and slap her for me. Wipe that look of defiance off her face. You are the man of this house. Act like it. Drown out her noise. Teach this insolent daughter a lesson she will never forget. Show her what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Do it, Otis. Do it, or so help me God. You will regret it for the rest of your miserable life." The command hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It was medieval. It was barbaric. Even Chad looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking at the floor. But Bianca looked eager. Her eyes were shining with the anticipation of violence. She wanted to see me hurt. She wanted to see me broken physically, because she realized she could not break me mentally. She wanted her big, strong daddy to put the little rebel back in her place. I tightened my grip on Jordan, shielding his head with my hand. I braced myself. I knew this drill. I knew the heavy tread of my father's boots coming toward me. I remembered the stinging heat of his hand from my childhood. He had always been her hammer. Whenever she felt slighted, whenever I stepped out of line, whenever I shone too bright, she would point and he would strike. He never asked why. He never asked if I was innocent. He just did it to make her stop screaming. To keep his peace, he destroyed mine. I watched him gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning gray. I waited for the monster to rise. I waited for the blow that would finally sever the last artery of love I had for him. I waited for him to choose her one last time. The sound of the leather chair groaning under my father's weight was the loudest thing in the room. Otis placed his hands on his knees and pushed himself up. It was a slow and painful process, like watching an old mountain crumble and then reform. His joints popped. His breathing was heavy. He stood there for a moment, swaying slightly as if the air around him was too thin. He looked massive in the small living room, his broad shoulders blocking out the light from the window. He did not look at me. He did not look at my mother. He stared straight ahead, at nothing, his face a mask of weary resignation. Then he began to move. 1 step, 2 steps. The heavy thud of his boots on the white carpet vibrated through the floorboards and up into the soles of my feet. I knew that walk. It was the walk of a man doing a job he hated but felt he had to do. It was the walk of the enforcer. I squeezed my eyes shut. I turned my body to shield Jordan, completely creating a human cage around my son. I hunched my shoulders, preparing for the impact. I remembered the weight of his hand from when I was 16, and I had dared to talk back to Mom about my curfew. I remembered the sting of his ring against my cheek. I knew exactly how this would feel. I braced myself for the pain, but mostly I braced myself for the heartbreak. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the physical confirmation that I was unloved and unprotected. The footsteps got closer. Thud, thud, thud. They were right beside me now. I could smell the old spice and sawdust that clung to his clothes. I could hear the rasp of his breathing. I flinched, anticipating the swing. I waited for the shout. I waited for the violence that would finally end us. But the blow never came. Instead, I felt a displacement of air, a breeze created by a large body moving with purpose. The footsteps did not stop at me. They continued. They moved past my shoulder. They moved past where I stood trembling with my son. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the harsh light of the chandelier. I turned my head, expecting to see him turning back to strike me from behind. But he was not looking at me. He was not even thinking about me. Otis continued walking until he reached the other side of the coffee table. He stopped directly in front of Bianca. My sister was still standing there, a smug smile plastered on her face, expecting to see her father discipline the unruly servant. She was waiting for the show. She was waiting for her victory. But as Otis loomed over her, blocking out the view of the rest of the room, her smile faltered. She looked up at him, confusion clouding her eyes. She took a half step back, her heels catching on the rug. "Dad," she said, her voice uncertain. "What are you doing? Tiana is over there." Otis did not answer her. He stood there like a statue, his chest heaving, his hands hanging loose at his sides. He looked down at his favorite daughter. He looked at the woman who had just smashed a child's toy for sport. He looked at the golden child who had never been told no in her entire life. And for the first time in 30 years, his eyes were not filled with adoration. They were filled with something cold and terrifyingly clear. He was not there to defend her. He was there to see her, really see her. And what he saw made his face crumble into a mask of pure devastation. Otis looked down at the floor, staring at the jagged pieces of the gaming system scattered across the expensive white rug. It looked like a crime scene, a small, innocent thing destroyed for no reason other than spite. He looked at the plastic shards, and then he looked at the mud-stained sneaker prints that trailed back to where Tiana stood protecting her son. He saw the physical evidence of the violence that had just occurred in his home. Then he slowly lifted his eyes to Chad. My son-in-law was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked bored. He looked entitled. He looked at my father with an expression that said, "Get on with it, old man, handle your business." There was no respect in his eyes. There was only the arrogant expectation that he would continue to be protected and provided for while contributing absolutely nothing. Otis looked at him, and for the first time he did not see a son. He saw a parasite. He saw a man who kicked a broken toy to hurt a single mother. He saw a man who lived in his guest house and drove a car he did not pay for while mocking the woman who actually paid the bills. The realization seemed to hit Otis like a physical weight. He shuddered, his breath hitching in his chest. He turned his head slowly, painfully, until he was looking directly at my mother. Claudette was still standing there, her finger pointing at me, her face twisted in a mask of expectant rage. She was waiting for the sound of the slap. She was waiting for the obedience she had commanded for 40 years. She wanted blood. She wanted me broken. But Otis just looked at her. He looked at the woman he had married, the woman he had feared, the woman he had let run his life, and he shook his head. It was a small movement, but it was earth-shattering. "You told me to hit her," he said, his voice raspy and strange. It sounded like a rusty gate being forced open. "You told me to stand up and strike my daughter. You want me to beat the girl who just told us she has been sending $2,000 a month to this house for 10 years. You want me to hurt the only person in this room who has ever sacrificed anything for us." Claudette blinked, her arm dropping slightly. "What are you talking about, Otis? Do not be a fool. She is lying. She is disrespectful. Do your duty." "My duty?" Otis repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. "My duty is to protect this family, and I have failed. I have failed because I listened to you. I let you tell me who to love and who to ignore. I let you convince me that Bianca was the prize and Tiana was the burden. But I look around this room, Claudette, and I see the truth. I see a daughter who buys her own house and a daughter who breaks toys. I see a daughter who sends checks and a daughter who steals keys. And you want me to hit the one who pays the bills. You want me to strike the only child who has actually been filial to us, while you let these leeches bleed us dry. He gestured violently at Bianca and Chad, his hand trembling with a mix of rage and sorrow. You want me to punish the provider to protect the parasites. Is that what we have become? Is that what you have turned me into? A guard dog for thieves? No, Claudette. I will not do it. I will not raise my hand against her. Not today. Not ever again. The silence that followed my father's declaration was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It was not just quiet. It was the vacuum left when a fundamental law of physics is broken. Gravity had stopped working. The sun had risen in the west. Otis had defied Claudette. My mother stood there with her mouth hanging open, a look of genuine, uncomprehending shock plastered across her face. She looked like a computer that had encountered a fatal error. Her programming did not include a scenario where her husband grew a spine. She tried to speak, but only a strangled squeak came out. She looked at Bianca for support, but my sister was staring at our father with wide, terrified eyes. For the first time in her life, Bianca realized that her protector, her enforcer, was gone. The wall she hid behind had just crumbled. Otis did not look at them. He looked down at his left hand. He raised it slowly into the light of the chandelier. His hand was large and calloused, the hand of a man who used to build things before he was reduced to sitting in a corner. On his ring finger sat a thick gold band. It was dull with age and tight against his skin, embedding itself into his flesh, as if it had become a part of him. I watched him stare at it. I saw the history written in his gaze. 40 years of marriage. 40 years of silence. 40 years of watching his wife destroy his children while he stood by and did nothing. He looked at that ring not as a symbol of love, but as a shackle. It was the chain that bound him to this toxicity. It was the metal band that had cut off his circulation and kept him numb. He reached over with his right hand and grasped the gold band. His face contorted in pain. It was not physical pain, although the ring was tight. It was the agony of a man ripping away the only identity he had known for 4 decades. He twisted it, the skin bunching and turning white around the metal. It would not budge easily. It had been there too long. It had grown into him. He gritted his teeth, his jaw muscles jumping. He twisted it again, harder this time. I saw tears well up in his eyes. He was mourning the time he had lost. He was mourning the father he should have been. He was physically wrestling with the ghosts of his past right there in the living room. Every twist was a battle. Every millimeter the ring moved was a war won against his own cowardice. He looked up at me as he struggled with the gold band. His eyes were pleading. He wanted me to see this. He needed me to witness the moment he finally decided to cut himself loose. He was in agony, but underneath the pain there was something else. A steely resolve that I had never seen before. He was waking up, and the first thing he was going to do was break his chains. With one final wrenching motion, my father tore the gold band over his knuckle. The sound of friction was audible in the silent room, a dry rasp of metal against skin. He gasped as it came free, holding his hand to his chest, as if he had just severed a limb. The ring sat in his right palm, heavy and dull. He looked at it for a long moment, his breathing ragged and loud. He was looking at 40 years of promises that had been broken not by him, but by the woman standing opposite him. He was looking at the symbol of his bondage. And then, with a movement so sudden and violent that Bianca actually jumped, he slammed his hand down onto the expensive glass coffee table. The sound was explosive, metal striking glass with enough force to crack the surface. It rang out like a gunshot echoing off the vaulted ceilings and vibrating in the crystal chandelier. The ring spun wildly on the glass surface, a golden blur whirring and dancing before finally rattling to a stop directly in front of my mother. It lay there innocent and small, yet heavier than the entire house. Claudette stared at it. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. She looked from the ring to the empty red indentation on Otis's finger. The skin there was raw and pale, shriveled from decades of being covered. It looked vulnerable. It looked like a wound that could finally begin to heal. Otis lowered his hand. He did not rub the sore spot. He let it throb. He let the air hit that skin for the first time since the 80s. He stood taller. The slump in his shoulders that I had associated with him my entire life vanished. He seemed to grow 3 inches in height. He took a breath, a deep lung-filling breath that did not shudder or catch. He was breathing free air. He looked across the table at my mother. Claudette opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to command him to put it back on, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. She had never seen this man before. She had married a boy she could mold, and she had lived with a servant she could order. She did not know what to do with a man who had nothing left to lose. Otis spoke. His voice was not loud. It did not boom like hers did. It was quiet. It was steady. It was the voice of a judge delivering a verdict from which there is no appeal. He looked her dead in the eye, stripping away every layer of her pretense and her lies. He saw her, and he destroyed her with 4 simple words. I kept the receipts. The sentence hung in the air, simple and devastating. He did not elaborate immediately. He did not need to. The weight of those 4 words settled over the room like a shroud. I saw a flicker of genuine terror behind my mother's eyes. She knew. In that split second, she knew exactly what he meant. She thought he had been blind. She thought he had been stupid. She thought he had been sitting in his chair reading his books and ignoring the world. She had underestimated him just as she had underestimated me. And that was going to be her undoing. Otis reached into the inside pocket of his Sunday suit jacket. His hand moved slowly and deliberately, the way a man reaches for a weapon he has prayed he would never have to use. He withdrew a thick leather-bound notebook. It was worn at the corners, the spine cracked and peeling from years of use. It was swollen with loose papers that had been shoved haphazardly between the pages. Yellowed receipts stuck out at odd angles, along with folded bank statements and carbon copies of checks that looked like they dated back a decade. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, and then he tossed it onto the glass table. It landed next to his wedding ring with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. The notebook fell open, and papers spilled out across the glass surface like a fan of incriminating playing cards. My mother stared at the book as if it were a bomb. She recognized it. I could tell by the way her eyes widened and her breath hitched in her throat. She knew exactly what was inside that leather cover. She had probably seen him writing in it for years, thinking he was just doodling or keeping track of his gardening supplies. She had never suspected that he was building a case against her. She had never suspected that the silent man in the corner was actually the most dangerous person in the room. Otis reached down and picked up a piece of paper. His hand was steady now, the tremors gone. "You told Tiana the roof was leaking 5 years ago," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You told her the water damage was destroying the structural integrity of the house. You cried on the phone begging her for $5,000 for emergency repairs. She sent it the next day. I saw the deposit slip." He held up the paper in his hand, turning it so everyone could see. It was an invoice from a luxury car dealership. "But this is not a receipt for roofing materials, Claudette. This is the down payment for Bianca's Range Rover, the one she crashed 3 months later. You took Tiana's emergency fund, the money she scraped together while raising a special needs child alone, and you used it to buy a toy for your golden girl." He dropped the paper and picked up another one. This one was a bank transfer slip. "2 years ago, you said the plumbing needed to be replaced. You said the pipes were bursting. You got $3,000 from Tiana. He slammed the slip down in front of Chad. That money went directly to a collection agency in Las Vegas to pay off Chad's gambling debt so his kneecaps would not get broken. Tiana paid for his mistakes while he laughed at her shoes. Otis flipped through the pages faster now, his voice rising with each accusation. You said my heart medication cost too much. You said the insurance would not cover it. You guilted her into sending an extra $500 a month for my health. He pulled out a glossy brochure and a billing statement from a clinic in Miami. But my medication is free, Claudette. It has been fully covered by my veteran benefits for 15 years. That money did not go to my heart. It went to your vanity. These are the bills for your tummy tuck and your facelift. You cut open your own body with the money your daughter bled for. You literally wore her sacrifice on your face while you called her a failure. I stood there listening to the itemized list of my exploitation, and I felt sick. It was not just greed. It was evil. Every time I had sacrificed, every time I had gone without thinking, I was keeping my parents safe. They had been laughing all the way to the bank. They had monetized my love and used it to fund their lifestyle. My father kept reading receipt after receipt, laying out a decade of theft on the coffee table, until the glass surface was covered in the white paper of their betrayal. Bianca moved like a cornered animal. She saw the evidence of her theft spread out like a buffet of sins, and she knew she had to stop him before he read another page. She lunged across the coffee table, her manicured claws reaching for the leather notebook that held her destruction. She was not thinking. She was reacting on pure instinct, trying to bury the truth before it could consume her. "Give that to me," she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of ugly desperation. "You are senile, old man. You do not know what you are reading. Those are my private papers." Otis did not flinch. He did not cower. As her hand closed in on the ledger, he moved with a speed and strength that belied his age. He brought his arm up in a sharp, sweeping motion, knocking her hand away with the audible slap of flesh against flesh. It was not a hit, but it was a rejection so violent and absolute that it sent Bianca stumbling backward into the arm of the sofa. She gasped, clutching her wrist, looking at him as if he had just grown a second head. "Do not touch me!" Otis roared, his voice filling the room and vibrating in the glass of the windows. "Do not ever touch me again with those hands that have stolen from your own blood. I am not your servant, Bianca. I am not your bank account. And I am certainly not senile. I am the only one in this house who has been awake for the last decade while you all slept in a bed of lies." Bianca rubbed her wrist, looking at him with wide, terrified eyes. She had never been told no. She had certainly never been physically rebuffed by the man who had spent her entire life worshipping the ground she walked on. "Dad," she whimpered, trying to summon the tears that usually worked. "You hurt me. You are hurt." Otis said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that was even scarier than his shout. "You are hurt because I stopped you from hiding your crimes. What about the hurt you caused Tiana? What about the hurt you caused that little boy over there?" He pointed a trembling finger at Jordan, who was watching the scene with wide, fearful eyes. "I stayed quiet for 10 years, Bianca. I bit my tongue when you demanded cars you could not afford. I looked the other way when your mother forged my signature on checks. I swallowed my pride and let you run this house because I wanted to believe that deep down we were still a family. I wanted to believe that if I just kept the peace, eventually you would grow up and your mother would find her heart. I sacrificed my dignity to keep this fake porcelain life from shattering." He took a step toward her and she shrank away. "But today I watched you break a child's toy. I watched you laugh while an autistic boy cried in fear. I watched you stand there in your stolen clothes and mock the sister who paid for them. And in that moment, when I heard your cruel laughter mixing with his sobs, I knew I was wrong. I was not keeping the peace. I was feeding a monster. And I am done feeding you." My mother looked at the sea of receipts scattered on the glass table and realized she had run out of words. The evidence was irrefutable. Her defense had crumbled, and her authority had been stripped away, layer by layer, in front of the people she needed to impress the most. She looked at Bianca, who was nursing her wrist, and at Chad, who was staring at his shoes. She looked at me, standing strong with my son. And finally, She looked at Otis, the man she had bullied into silence for decades, standing tall and holding the smoking gun. Panic flickered in her eyes, wild and desperate. She needed an escape route. She needed to reset the board. And when Claudette needed to win, she always played the victim card. She let out a strangled gasp that sounded practiced because it was. Her left hand flew up to clutch the silk fabric over her chest right above her heart. She squeezed her eyes shut and let out a low moan, tilting her head back just enough to catch the light. "Oh!" she wheezed, staggering slightly to the side. "My heart, it is happening again. Otis, help me. The stress, you are killing me, I cannot breathe. Call an ambulance." She crumpled toward the white leather sofa, making sure to fall gracefully enough not to hit her head, but dramatically enough to look life-threatening. Bianca screamed immediately, rushing to her side. "Mom! Oh my God, Mom! Dad, look what you did! You gave her a heart attack! Get her water! Call 911! I felt a jolt of adrenaline, the conditioned response of a daughter who had been trained to fear her mother's mortality. I took a half step forward, my instinct to save her overriding my anger for a split second. But then I saw my father. Otis had not moved. He had not rushed to catch her. He had not reached for his phone. He stood completely still, watching his wife writhe on the sofa with a look of absolute boredom. His expression was cold, detached, and utterly unimpressed. He watched her performance the way a parent watches a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store aisle, waiting for the energy to run out. "Stop it, Claudette," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through Bianca's hysterical sobbing like a knife. "Just stop." Claudette peeked one eye open, seeing that her audience was not reacting as planned. She groaned louder, adding a tremble to her hand. "I am dying," she wailed. "My chest! It feels like an elephant is sitting on it. You have broken my heart, Otis." Otis laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. "I am not calling an ambulance, Claudette, because we both know there is nothing wrong with your heart. We went to the cardiologist last month, remember? The best specialist in the city. The one Tiana pays for." He gestured to me without looking away from his wife. "That premium health insurance policy, the one that gets you into private rooms and covers every single test you demand. Tiana pays the monthly premium for that too, $500 a month deducted from her paycheck so you can have the best care. And the doctor said your heart is as strong as an ox. The only thing wrong with you is your conscience, but sadly insurance does not cover that." Claudette stopped moaning. She sat up slightly, her hand still on her chest, but the act was slipping. "You are not having a heart attack," he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "You are having a wallet attack. You are in pain because you realize the bank is closed. You are gasping for air because you realized your free ride is over. Do not insult my intelligence with this cheap theater. If you were really sick, I would carry you to the hospital on my back. But you are not sick. You are just a liar who got caught. So sit up, wipe that fake tear off your cheek, and listen to what is going to happen next, because you are not going to like it." Otis turned his back on the woman sobbing theatrically on the sofa. He did not look at Bianca, who was paralyzed by the sudden shift in the family dynamic. He focused his entire being on the one person in the room who actually mattered. He began to walk toward me. It was not the trudge of a beaten man, but the steady stride of a father returning from a long and shameful absence. I watched him come closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. Part of me was still afraid. Part of me expected him to stop halfway and tell me that I had made my point, and that we should all just calm down. But he did not stop until he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I could see the wet sheen in his own eyes and the trembling of his chin. He reached out his hand. It was the same hand that had just slammed the ring onto the table, the hand that had just struck down Bianca's greed. But now it was gentle. He took my hand in his, engulfing my cold fingers in his rough, warm palm. He squeezed it tight, a physical anchor in the storm. He looked down at Jordan, who was still clutching my leg, and then he looked up at me. His face was open and raw, stripped of all the defenses he had worn for as long as I could remember. Tiana, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of his regret. I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I tried to speak to tell him it was okay, but the words caught in my throat. It was not okay. It had never been okay. And for the first time, he was not asking me to pretend it was. I was a coward, he continued, the confession pouring out of him. I was a weak man. I let her run over you because it was easier than fighting her. I let her take your money because I was too afraid to tell her no. I watched you struggle. I watched you work yourself to the bone. I saw the dark circles under your eyes when you visited. I saw the cheap shoes you wore so you could send checks to buy her expensive ones. And I said nothing. I sat in my chair and I read my books and I pretended that as long as I did not actively hurt you, I was innocent. But I was not innocent. My silence was the weapon she used to bleed you dry. He lifted his other hand and cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. You needed a father, Tiana. You needed a protector. And instead you got a ghost. I failed you in every way a father can fail a child. I let them make you feel like you were less than. I let them treat you like a servant in the house you paid for. And worst of all, I let you believe that I agreed with them. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce intensity. But that ends right now. I am done being a ghost. I am done being a coward. Today, I am making a choice. I am drawing a line in the sand. I am choosing a side, Tiana. And I choose you. I choose my daughter. I choose my grandson. I choose the only two people in this world who have shown me what real love and sacrifice look like. The dam inside me broke. It was not a slow leak, but a sudden, catastrophic failure of the walls I had built to survive. I let out a sob that sounded like something tearing inside my chest. These were not the tears of frustration or anger that I had shed so many times before. These were the hot, cleansing tears of validation. For 30 years I had waited to hear those words. For 30 years I had waited for him to see me, to pick me, to love me enough to fight for me. I collapsed forward, burying my face in his chest, my hands clutching the lapels of his old suit jacket. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight, rocking me slightly, just like he used to when I was a little girl, and the thunder was too loud. I cried for the money I had lost. I cried for the insults I had swallowed. But mostly I cried because for the first time in my life, I was not fighting alone. My father had finally come home. Claudette scrambled up from the white leather sofa, shedding her feigned illness like a snake shedding skin. The realization that she had lost control of her husband sent her into a frenzy of panicked aggression. She stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving, her face mottled with red blotches of rage. She pointed a trembling finger at the front door, her voice rising to a shriek that cracked under the strain. "Get out!" she screamed. "Both of you get out! If you want to side with that ungrateful wretch, then you can leave with her, Otis. Pack your bags. Take your old books and your miserable silence and get out of my sight. This is my house. I built this home. I decorated every room. I am the matriarch here, and I will not be disrespected under my own roof. I want you both gone before I call the sheriff to drag you out by your hair." She stood there panting, looking like a queen whose castle was crumbling, but who refused to surrender the crown. Bianca rallied behind her, nodding aggressively, finding her courage again now that her mother was yelling. "That is right," Bianca chimed in. "Get out. This is Mom's house. You have no right to be here if you cannot respect her." I pulled away from my father's embrace, gently patting his arm to reassure him. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. The moment for sadness had passed. Now it was time for the final audit. I walked over to my large leather tote bag, the sensible work bag that Bianca had mocked earlier for being ugly and utilitarian. I placed it on the dining table and unzipped the main compartment. The sound of the zipper was loud in the sudden silence. I reached inside and bypassed the tissues and the snacks I kept for Jordan. My hand closed around a thick blue legal folder. I turned back to face my mother, holding the folder against my chest. I looked at her with a strange mixture of pity and finality. She was so sure of her power. She was so sure of her ownership. She truly believed that because she said something was hers, the world would bend to her will. But the world of finance does not care about feelings. It cares about contracts. "You are wrong, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a professional register. I sounded calm, almost clinical, the same way I sounded when I testified in fraud trials. "This is not your house. In fact, this has not been your house for 6 months." Claudette stopped shouting. Her mouth hung open slightly. "What are you talking about?" she scoffed, but her eyes darted to the blue folder in my hands. "Of course it is my house. My name is on the deed." "Not anymore," I said. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents stapled together with a cover sheet stamped in red ink. "You stopped paying the property taxes 5 years ago, Mom. You took out a third mortgage on this place to pay for Bianca's first wedding, the one that lasted 6 months. You hid the notices from Dad. You threw the bank letters in the trash, assuming they were bluffing. You thought you could charm your way out of foreclosure, just like you charm your way out of everything else." I walked closer and held the document up so she could read the header. "But banks do not care about your charm. They foreclosed on this property in January. They seized the title. You have been living here as a squatter for half a year, waiting for the sheriff to come and evict you. The only reason he has not come is because someone stepped in and bought the debt. Someone paid the arrears and purchased the property at the auction before it could be listed publicly." I watched the blood drain from her face as the reality of her situation began to sink in. She looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. "I bought it, Mom," I said softly. "I used my savings. The money you thought I didn't have. I bought the note from the bank. I own the roof over your head. I own the floor under your feet. I own the walls you are standing between. This is not your house, Claudette. It is mine." I pulled the final document from the blue folder. It was thick and heavy, the pages stapled together with the authority of a high court judgment. I walked over to the glass table and laid it down right next to my father's wedding ring and the notebook of receipts. The paper made a dry, rasping sound against the glass. I pointed to the second page where a jagged signature sat in black ink. It was a signature I knew better than my own. It was my mother's signature. But right below it was another signature, scrawled in a frantic, loopy hand that tried too hard to look elegant. It was Bianca's. "You want to know why I had to step in?" I asked, looking from my sister to my mother. "You want to know why the bank was so aggressive? It was not just the unpaid property taxes, Mom. That was a lie you told yourself to sleep at night. The truth is much uglier. The truth is that Bianca mortgaged this house. She took out a home equity line of credit against the property value. She drained the equity that Dad spent 40 years building brick by brick. And she did it to buy cryptocurrency." Bianca let out a small squeak of terror, shrinking back against the sofa. I turned my gaze on her. "You thought you were going to be a millionaire, didn't you, Bianca? You saw some influencer on TikTok talking about the next big coin and you got greedy. You thought you could double the money and pay off the loan before anyone noticed. You thought you were smarter than the market. But you are not smart, Bianca. You are reckless. You put $75,000 into a digital scam and it crashed to zero in 3 days. You lost everything. You lost the money. You lost the equity. And you lost the house." I looked at my mother, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "And you knew," I said, my voice trembling with the sheer magnitude of her betrayal. "You knew what she was doing. You went to the bank with her. You sat in that office and you signed the guarantor papers. You put your name on the line that said you authorized this risk. You leveraged your husband's home, the home he worked 2 jobs to pay for without even telling him. You gambled his security on your favorite daughter's get-rich-quick scheme." Otis made a sound that was half gasp and half growl. He picked up the document, his hands shaking violently as he read the lines I had highlighted. He saw the loan amount, he saw the date, and he saw his wife's signature authorizing the destruction of his legacy. The betrayal was absolute. She had not just stolen money, she had stolen his safety. She had conspired with Bianca to sell the ground out from under him. "You lied to him every day for 6 months," I continued relentless in my exposure of the truth. When the foreclosure notices started coming, you hid the mail. When the bank called you, deleted the voicemails. You let him sit in that chair thinking he was safe, thinking he provided a home for his family, while you and Bianca frantically tried to cover up your disaster. You were not protecting him. You were protecting yourselves. You were hoping a miracle would happen before the sheriff showed up with an eviction notice. Well, the miracle did not happen, Mom. The bank happened, and then I happened. I am the only reason you are not living in a shelter right now. Chad and Bianca looked at each other with eyes wide and frantic. The silence in the room was so thick, it felt like it was choking them. The arrogant smirk was completely gone from Chad's face, replaced by the pale, sweaty sheen of a man who knows he has backed himself into a corner with no exit. Bianca was trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the sofa as if the floor was tilting beneath her feet. They exchanged a glance that was pure, unadulterated panic. It was the look of two con artists realizing that the long con was over, and they had been outsmarted by the very mark they had spent years tormenting. They looked at the folder on the table and then back at me as the terrifying reality of their situation began to take hold. They were not dealing with Tiana the pushover anymore. They were dealing with Tiana, the owner. I tapped the blue folder with my index finger, drawing their attention back to the hard evidence. You see, banks do not like bad debt. I explained, my voice calm and educational, as if I were giving a presentation to a board of directors. They want to get it off their books. When a loan goes into default and the property is underwater, they bundle it up and sell it to the highest bidder just to recoup a fraction of their losses. It is a cold mathematical process. They do not care about family history or memories, they just want the red ink off their ledger. I took a step closer to them, enjoying the way they flinched. My firm specializes in acquiring these distressed assets. We buy the debt that nobody else wants. I was sitting at my desk 3 weeks ago, reviewing the latest portfolio of toxic loans from the bank that holds your mortgage. I was scrolling through the list of addresses, just looking at numbers and risk factors. And then my heart stopped. I saw 42 Oak Street. I saw my childhood home listed as a non-performing asset, scheduled for immediate liquidation. I paused, letting the words sink in. You have no idea how close you came to coming home and finding a padlock on the front door. The bank was ready to auction this house off to a developer who would have bulldozed it to build condos. But I intervened. I went to my partners and I made a personal request. I used my own capital, my own reputation, and my own money to purchase the note. I bought the debt from the bank before it hit the public market. I looked directly at Bianca, who was now crying silent tears of terror. So let me be crystal clear about what this means. I did not just pay off the loan, I bought the rights to it. I stepped into the shoes of the bank. Technically and legally, I am the sole creditor of this estate. I hold the deed, I hold the lien, and I hold the power to foreclose on this property whenever I choose. You are not living in Mom's house anymore. You are living in my house, and you are living here entirely at my mercy. Every night you sleep in those beds, every meal you cook in that kitchen, every shower you take is a gift from me. The sister you called cheap, the daughter you called a mistake. I own the very ground you are standing on, and frankly I am reconsidering my tenant list. The laughter died in their throats the moment the heavy manila envelope hit the mahogany dining table with a sound like a gunshot. Just seconds ago, my mother had been swirling her Chardonnay, telling my brother that I was a parasite who needed to be cut off, but now the room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in their glasses. I watched my father reach for the document, his hands shaking slightly, not because he was afraid, but because he was annoyed that I had interrupted their celebration of my supposed failure. He pulled out the single sheet of paper and adjusted his reading glasses. I waited. I had waited 5 years for this exact moment, enduring their insults and their condescension, while I quietly built my empire in the shadows. I watched his eyes scan the header, then the body of the text, and finally the signature at the bottom. The color drained from his face so fast, I thought he might faint. My mother, annoyed by his silence, snatched the paper from his hands. "What is this nonsense?" she snapped. Then she read it. Eviction notice. Property owner, Tiana Williams. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I did not see superiority in her eyes. I saw fear. "This is a joke," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You cannot own this house. We have lived here for 20 years. You did live here," I corrected, my voice calm and cold. "But you stopped paying the mortgage 6 months ago to fund your country club lifestyle and my brother's gambling debts. The bank foreclosed last week. I bought the deed this morning through my shell company. You are currently trespassing on my property." My brother stood up, knocking his chair over. "You are lying. You work as a waitress. You do not have this kind of money." I smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had held all the cards while they were playing make-believe. "I have owned the restaurant chain you eat at for 3 years," I said. "I own the building your office is in. And as of today, I own the roof over your heads." I looked at the three of them, the people who were supposed to be my family but had treated me like a servant. The original plan was to be generous. I took a step closer to the table, my shadow falling over them. "I was going to give you 30 days to pack your things and find a new place. I was going to let you leave with some dignity because despite everything we share blood." My mother let out a sob, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. However, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. "Based on the conversation I just overheard, based on the fact that you called me a parasite in the house I just paid for, based on your attitude today, that offer is rescinded. You do not have 30 days, you have 24 hours. If you are not out by this time tomorrow, I will have the sheriff remove you, and your belongings will be on the curb." My father started to beg, stammering about where they would go, but I was already walking toward the door. "You have friends," I said over my shoulder. "Go ask them for help. See if they treat you better than you treated me." I walked out into the cool night air and didn't look back, leaving them in the ruins of the life they thought they owned. The sound of his knees hitting the hardwood floor echoed in the sudden silence of the dining room, a pathetic thud that signaled the total collapse of his arrogance. Just moments ago, Chad had been leaning back in his chair, mocking my clothes and my career, but now he was crawling toward me like a frightened child. He reached out, grabbing the hem of my dress, his knuckles white with desperation. "Tiana, please," he begged, his voice cracking and high-pitched. "You cannot do this to us. We are family. Blood is thicker than water, remember. I was just joking earlier. You know how I get when I have had a few drinks. It was just a prank, sis. Please do not throw us out." I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no satisfaction. Just a cold, clinical observation of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. A joke. That was always their defense. When he locked me in the basement when I was 10, it was a joke. When he stole my college savings to buy a sports car, it was a joke. When he told his friends I was the maid so he would not be embarrassed by me, it was a joke. Now that the power dynamic had shifted, he wanted to hide behind that word one last time. But I was done laughing. I took a slow, deliberate step back, pulling my dress from his grasp, as if his touch was contaminated. "Save your breath, Chad," I said, my voice calm and devoid of warmth. "You are going to need it." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, confusion warring with the fear in his eyes. Need it for what, he whispered. I smiled, and it was a sharp, dangerous thing. "For your exit interview," I replied. He froze on the floor, blinking rapidly. "What are you talking about?" I checked my watch, feigning nonchalance. "You might want to check your phone, assuming they have not remotely wiped it yet. You see, while I was finalizing the deed to this house this morning, I also made a very interesting phone call to the senior partners at your brokerage firm." Chad's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. "You didn't!" he gasped. "Oh, but I did," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the room. "We had a fascinating conversation about your recent closing numbers. Specifically, we discussed the client deposit funds that seemed to have vanished from the escrow accounts and reappeared in your personal gambling fund." I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. He started to shake his head, mouthing the word no over and over again. I sent them everything, Chad. The bank transfers, the altered ledgers, the entire paper trail you thought you had buried so deep no one would ever find it. I found it in 2 days. Your boss was very interested. In fact, he was so interested that he fired you effective immediately about 20 minutes ago. Chad slumped forward, his forehead resting on the floor, a sound of pure despair escaping his throat. So when I said you have 24 hours to leave my house, I was actually being generous, I said, looking down at his trembling form. You are going to need every second of that time. Not just to pack your bags, but to find a criminal defense attorney. Because you are not just homeless as of today. You are unemployed and facing felony embezzlement charges. I turned away from him, leaving him broken on the floor of the house he used to think he ruled. Tick-tock, Chad. The clock is ticking. The screaming started before Chad could even lift his head from the floor. It was a primal shriek of rage that shattered the last remnants of dignity in the room. Bianca launched herself across the Persian rug like a feral animal, her manicured nails aiming for Chad's face. You lying piece of filth, she screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. You told me the investments were safe. You told me the bonus was coming next week to pay off the credit cards. I watched as she pummeled his chest with her fists, her expensive jewelry flashing in the light of the chandelier I now owned. It was a grotesque display of greed turning on itself. For years they had been a united front of superiority, sneering at my thrift store clothes and my second-hand car. Now they were tearing each other apart like starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. Chad tried to fend her off, but he was too broken, too weak from the weight of his own destruction. Get off me! He yelled, pushing her away, but she scrambled back, clawing at his designer shirt, ripping the fabric down the middle. We are going to jail, you idiot, she shrieked, spitting in his face. They will come for everything, my car, my clothes. You ruined us. You ruined me. She grabbed his hair, shaking him violently, blaming him for the financial ruin she had happily helped him create. And then there was Mother, the Iron Lady of the family, the woman who could silence a room with a single arched eyebrow. She did not scream, she did not fight, she simply crumbled. It was as if her skeleton had suddenly dissolved. She slid from her chair, her designer dress bunching up around her knees as she hit the floor with a heavy thud that no one seemed to notice amidst the fighting. Her hands trembled as she reached out toward the fighting couple, but she did not have the strength to stop them. Her face was a mask of absolute horror, not because her family was falling apart, but because she realized she had backed the wrong horse. Her golden child was a felon, and the daughter she had thrown away held the keys to her kingdom. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and vacant, stripping away decades of pretension. She looked old. For the first time in my life, she looked small. I stood by the sideboard watching the chaos unfold with a strange sense of detachment. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of adrenaline at seeing them brought so low. I thought I would want to laugh or point or shout, "See, I told you so." But there was none of that. It was just quiet inside my head. The anger that had fueled me for 5 years, the burning need for validation, it just evaporated. It was like watching a storm on a television screen, violent and destructive, but unable to touch me. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I was just done. The monsters of my childhood were not monsters at all. They were just small, greedy people who had built their lives on sand. I looked at the eviction notice still sitting on the table where I had thrown it. It was just a piece of paper now. The real eviction had already happened. I had evicted them from my mind. I had evicted their power over me. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my hand, and watched them destroy themselves. There was no need for me to do anything else. Gravity was doing the work for me. The flashing blue and red lights swept across the living room walls, cutting through the sheer curtains like a strobe light of emergency. I had called them 20 minutes ago while sitting in my car down the street, knowing exactly how this night would devolve. I knew my brother had a violent temper when cornered, and I knew my mother would never leave this house without being forced by the law. The heavy pounding on the front door froze the chaos in the room instantly. Bianca stopped screaming, and Chad froze mid-sob. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the crackle of a police radio from the porch. I walked to the door calmly and opened it. Two officers stood there stern and imposing, their hands resting near their belts. "I am the owner," I said, presenting the deed and the eviction paperwork I had prepared. "I have intruders who are refusing to vacate the premises, and the situation has turned violent." They stepped inside, bringing the cold night air with them. Their presence sucked the last bit of oxygen out of the room. They looked at the shattered glass on the floor, the torn shirt on Chad, and the utter disarray of what was once a pristine dining room. "Ma'am, we have a report of a domestic disturbance," one officer said, looking at Bianca, who was now trying to smooth her hair and regain some shred of her socialite dignity. As the officers began taking names and explaining that they needed to leave the property immediately, my father stood up. He moved slowly, like a man waking from a long coma. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. He looked at the crystal chandelier I now owned. He looked at the expensive rug stained with wine. Then he looked at my mother. Claudette was still on the floor, a heap of misery and shock. She saw him moving toward the door, and a fresh wave of panic seized her. She scrambled up, rushing to him and grabbing his sleeve with claw-like fingers. "Otis," she wailed, her voice thin and terrified. "Otis, do not leave me. Where are we going to go? Fix this, Otis. You always fix it." My father stopped. He looked down at her hand, clutching his arm. For 40 years, he had been her shadow, her bank account, and her enabler. He had funded her lifestyle, ignored her cruelty toward me, and supported her delusions of grandeur. But tonight, watching his son turn into a criminal and his wife turn into a monster, something in him finally snapped. He reached down and peeled her fingers off his jacket one by one. It was slow and deliberate. He did not look angry. He looked exhausted, broken, and done. "I am not going anywhere with you, Claudette," he said, his voice raspy and quiet. "I am going to my sister's house. Alone." She stared at him, mouth open, unable to comprehend that he was defying her. "Otis, please," she whispered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding band. It was a thick gold band, heavy and expensive, just like everything she had ever demanded from him. He walked back to the dining table and placed it gently on the polished wood. It made a small hollow clink that sounded louder than any scream. "Keep it," he said without looking back at her. "You can sell it. It is the only thing I have left to give you." Then he walked out, past the police, past me, and into the night. Claudette screamed his name, a sound of pure desolation, but the door had already closed. She was alone in a house that wasn't hers, surrounded by the wreckage of a life she had destroyed. The cool night air felt like a baptism, washing away the stale scent of greed and desperation that clung to the house behind us. I guided my father down the front steps, his hand resting heavily on my arm. He walked with a slight limp, not from injury, but from the sheer exhaustion of a lifetime spent carrying a burden that was never his to bear. Beside me, little Jordan held my hand tight, his wide eyes looking up at me with trust. He did not understand the violence he had just witnessed, but he knew he was safe now. He knew we were leaving the monsters behind. We reached my car, a sleek silver sedan that gleamed under the streetlights. It was a symbol of everything they said I could never have. Success, independence, freedom. I opened the back door for Jordan and buckled him in. He yawned, clutching his stuffed bear, and within seconds his eyes were drooping. He was safe. That was all that mattered. I turned to my father. He was standing on the sidewalk, looking back at the house one last time. The police lights reflected in the windows, casting erratic shadows on the facade of the place that had been his prison. He took a deep, shuddering breath, filling his lungs with air that did not smell of my mother's perfume or my brother's lies. He exhaled slowly, a long white plume of mist in the cold air. It was the sound of a chain breaking. He turned away from the house and looked at me. Then he looked through the window at his grandson sleeping peacefully in the back seat. A smile broke across his tired face. It was small and fragile, but it was real. It was the first time I had seen him smile in years without looking over his shoulder to see if my mother approved. "I am ready, Tiana," he said, his voice steady. "Let us go home." I nodded and got into the driver's seat. The leather was cool and smooth beneath my hands. I started the engine, and the powerful hum was the only sound in the quiet street. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I could see the silhouette of the house shrinking in the distance. I could see the flashing lights where the police were escorting my brother and his wife off the property. I could imagine my mother sitting alone at that dining table staring at the wedding ring my father had left behind, realizing too late that people are not possessions. I turned the corner and the house disappeared from view. It was just a building now, a pile of bricks and wood that held no power over me. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold as we picked up speed, heading toward the highway, toward my house, toward peace. I looked at my father in the passenger seat. He had closed his eyes, his head resting back against the seat, finally at rest. I looked at Jordan in the back, safe and loved. And I realized the truth that had taken me 30 years to learn. Family is not the blood that runs through your veins. It is not the name you share or the house you live in. Family are the people who stand beside you when the walls come crashing down. Family are the ones who protect you when the world and even your own relatives try to break you. I drove into the night, leaving the wreckage of my past behind, moving forward into a future we would build together. Real family. Finally. Tiana's story is a powerful reminder that silence and success are the loudest forms of revenge. While her family focused on shallow appearances and cruelty, she focused on building a reality they could never touch. It teaches us that blood does not define family. Loyalty, respect, and protection do. Sometimes you must walk away from the people who raised you to find the peace you truly deserve. The greatest victory wasn't just evicting them from the house, but evicting their toxic influence from her mind. True worth comes from within, not from the approval of those who cannot see your value. If you believe that success is the ultimate comeback, hit that like button and subscribe for more satisfying stories of justice served.